Lawmakers at the state capitol are working on legislation that would speed up election results. The focus is on requiring early ballots to be returned early. That has also been a focus for Maricopa County officials, including Thomas Galvin, chairman of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, and he joins us now. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Good, thank you.
When last we spoke about a lot of things, but we talked about this a little bit. I want to get a little bit deeper in detail. A couple of bills, are these mirror bills in the House and Senate?
They are. There's Senate Bill 1011, which is sponsored by Senate President Warren Peterson, and then 2703, which is sponsored by his seatmate Lauren Hendricks.
What does the legislation do?
The legislation does exactly what I was asking for it to be done when I came and met with you in November. It moves up how we account for ballots and how many ballots are tabulated by election night. One, it moves up the deadline for dropping off those late early ballots. Right now we have about 300,000 people that are dropping off mail ballots on Election Day. The new cutoff would be Friday before Election Day. But also in consideration of that, it would allow for more polling places, and it would also allow weekend voting on Saturday and Monday before Election Day.
You mentioned weekend voting on Saturday and Sunday and Monday. Why not also allow those early ballots to be dropped off over the weekend? Why Friday?
Because we have to go through signature verification, and there are millions of people that vote through the mail ballot. Either they send it in through the U.S. Postal Service, but only about 40% of ballots are done that way. You still have a lot of people that like to drop off their ballots in person. But what happens is, what we saw last November, it takes about 10 days or 2 weeks for Maricopa County and the other 14 counties here in Arizona to go through that process of opening the envelopes, verifying that they're legit, going through signature verification. We have bipartisan teams that are overseeing the entire process. It slows down the process. And it's incumbent upon our volunteers to stick it out for those 2 weeks to see it through.
Is it possible to just simply invest more in staff and equipment to allow I can see maybe the day of the election. We've had county recorders over the years, from Stephen Richer all the way back, complaining about this, saying this is really mucking up the process. Okay, got that, but why not get more staff involved to allow for that weekend, to make it an ease into all this?
You're asking to see if we can just hire an exponential number of people for that weekend, and it's just not feasible. It just doesn't work. And the counties have tried everything. And we're talking about red counties, purple counties, blue counties, and we now have the Arizona Association of Counties, which testified for the House bill just 2 days ago that says we support this because this is just common sense election reform.
95% of all votes you'd like to see tabulated by election night.
Yeah, and I think we can get there with this legislation. And I like to say that my colleagues, especially my new colleagues on the board, Debbie Lesko, Kate Brophy-McGee, Mark Stewart, we're all united on this, and we understand that this would really do a lot to restore faith in the system just because people are frustrated at seeing us as one of the few states that takes so long to tabulate the votes.
But you mentioned restoring faith in the system, and we've talked about this before, and we've been around the block here a while. We've never had mistrust in our voting system. Something changed, and now there's mistrust, and it's not fast enough, and all these sorts of things.
Ted, there's a difference. So what we went through 4 years ago were people contesting the results of the elections or making outlandish claims about vote rigging or elections being pre-decided. This is different. This is about faith in the system. I give speeches to nonpartisan groups around Maricopa County. Last week I spoke to 300 people, Republicans, Democrats, Independents. I asked for a show of hands of who would like to see 95% of votes tabulated by election night. Everyone raised their hand. Everyone, people get it. And when I tell them that the governor is opposed to this, they're just flabbergasted.
The governor is opposed to this for a variety of reasons. It seems like the biggest reason is, though, it doesn't make voting easier from where she sits. How do you respond to that?
I respond that it's ludicrous. The whole point of this legislation was to make things easier. What I like to say is that this legislation is improving access to voting. We just talked about it. There's more polling places that are going to be available because we're going to be utilizing schools. We're going to have weekend voting, which right now, if you want to vote in person, you can only do it on Tuesday. With this new legislation, you can do it on Saturday, Monday. We've also expanded the number of days you can vote from 27 to 29 days. So this all opens up access to voting. I think what the governor is just saying is that she doesn't want ballots to be subjected to that deadline on Friday before Election Day. But the ship has sailed. People want that change.
I've also heard criticisms that if this goes through or something like this goes through, lines, polling places, they're going to be much longer than they used to be. And again, that would hurt, as some folks are just going to leave. People that like to drop off their early ballots, they're not going to go through the process. Are those valid criticisms?
Not valid at all. And this is one thing I worked on, particularly with my colleague Debbie Lesko, is we wanted to address the issue of having more people voting in person. And that is why this legislation allows for schools to be used as polling places, because we know that there's going to be more people showing up, more people who need to vote in person. And so when the governor says that this is a problem, that just doesn't make any sense.
As far as rural areas are concerned, will there be more opportunities there? Because again, in rural, you got to drive a long way to vote in person if you haven't mailed in that early ballot.
Yeah, and the legislation addresses, there's an amendment that addresses the situation between Maricopa County and the other counties, the rural counties.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've talked about this as well, and we've done a variety of shows on election concerns leading up to the election. We never had this problem with speed because we used to be a pretty reliably red state, and a lot of these races were over before they even started, and so you didn't have to worry about that.
Yep.
Things have gotten closer, races have gotten tighter, it's taking longer to count these ballots.
Yep.
Isn't that what's really at the core here?
In many ways, yes, that is the crux of the issue, but that's also why we should act with speed and deliberation on making improvements and changes. About 45 states are done tabulating their votes on election day or a couple days after that. But we're one of 7 swing states, and when we're voting 10 or 12 or 14 days later, the rest of the country is looking at us and saying, what's wrong with Arizona? Well, what's wrong with Arizona is that we have laws that are pretty silly and outdated and need to be changed. But if the media wants to call an election on election night, they can only do it if a vast majority of ballots are tabulated by election night. And so this restores the faith and also helps our election workers and volunteers. I don't understand why the governor is defending this current system. So I'm asking anyone who's watching now is to contact her and say we need changes because this is placing considerable strain on our system, and I don't think it's going to last.
Yeah, and we're planning on having the governor on as well, so we'll ask her about it too. Thomas Galvin, Chairman of Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. Good to see you.
Thank you, Ted.